Hi, I'm Heather, Business Development Lead for Co-operatives First. Thanks for tuning in to this Hometown Advantage webinar. This webinar, Fostering Community Innovation, was recorded on May 26, 2021. In this webinar, we'll hear from Wendy Peterson, Community Development Analyst from Community Futures Westman, and Michelle Wright, Community Economic Development Officer for Smoky Lake, Alberta. We hope you enjoyed this conversation, and to register for an upcoming webinar, check out cooperativesfirst.com/webinars.
And I think everyone just heard a something that said this meeting was being recorded, so don't get freaked out. We're keeping this later so that we can share it in the future. So we're going to record only the panel presentations because it doesn't really work to record simultaneous breakout rooms. So without any further ado, I'll ask Michelle to share with us, and I'm going to stop this share. She can go ahead.
Okay, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, whatever part of the country you're in. So responsive economic development, I guess, economic development is one of those things that it's typically challenging to measure. And the way that I've been measuring my responsiveness is when I have leadership questioning why I'm at certain places. So I love to hear from my leaders, my municipal leaders or members of the community, things like, why did you go to that meeting? Or why are you here? Or how come you came to this council session or whatever it is? And so for me, it really is to be on the ground, finding out what's going on. And we had a really good discussion in our breakout session about sort of this idea of pathfinding or wayfinding. And I do see that responsive economic development is all about just connecting people to who they need to be connected to. And that could include funding, it could include others that could help them. Small communities we're so challenged with having enough bodies to do all the work that needs to get done. And so finding folks that are really passionate about some of the areas that we want to develop for our community is really a lot of what I do. So I'm not particularly doing all the heavy lifting, but I'm certainly finding people that can help whoever the group is that's trying to get something done. So for me, we've got a couple things in our community that we did that you might be aware of. One is our pumpkin patch daycare. So that's a cooperative model that was put together a few years ago. And again, it was community members saying that this would be a great opportunity and helping, especially those in leadership, understand that those are all economic development activities. It doesn't have to be done by the economic development officer, but looking at those things like the foundational pieces we need in our community to make sure that we can attract people here, we can keep people here, we can keep our businesses running. The daycare was certainly one that by putting it into a cooperative, we got a lot of energy into making that work really, really well. We also have a major tourism initiative underway, which is to develop assets based on our culture, heritage, and ecological environment that we have. And that one we're also including a cooperative piece, and it's really on the investment side. So looking for investors in the community that can put their money into this tourism initiative and help us fund some of the asset development we need to do. So those are two that I would say from, that really the cooperatives piece. Being a bit creative about how we're going to approach it feeds into our responsiveness. And I think that's probably all I'll share for now, and certainly open to questions as we go through further parts of the discussion.
Okay, I'm gonna let Wendy go next and share, and then we will move into another discussion. So I think we'll just, Kyle, can you work your magic and do the spot? Okay, thank you. Yes, I knew I hired you as my assistant for a reason. Just kidding, I'm not paying you.
Bad, Kyle. She cut you out before you got started. So I'm Wendy Peterson, and I'm the Community Development Analyst here at Community Futures Westman. We're based in Brandon. We have a fairly large region. I know that there's quite a few people that are involved today that are EDOs or CDOs in our region, and I'm very fortunate to have an opportunity to connect with many of them. And over the last couple of weeks, actually, been having some very interesting discussions about economic development and the correlation and sometimes disconnect that people see when they talk about economic development and linking it back to the communities at large. I actually have worked in the cooperative since 1994. It was my very first job in nonprofit, was with a Seniors for Seniors co-op here in Brandon, which was a co-op that was set up to help older adults access programmings. We also had a job program where we would employ the older adults to do jobs for other people in the community. So it was a very unique model. I always have to tell the story that I learned from the very best. Don and Glenora Sliman founded that co-op, but Don was instrumental in setting up a number of the co-ops through Manitoba and Saskatchewan during the 30s and 40s. So I was very fortunate to be involved and be a sponge around them. So ever since then, I have really been a very big advocate of the cooperative system. And how cooperatives can actually work through a problem that sometimes when you hit that wall and you think there's nowhere else to go, many times you need to look around at the resources that are surrounding you to be able to figure out, yeah, we do have a solution here, and the solution lies within our own community and our own power in our own community. So, you know, one of the things that I always talk to people about is that I think sometimes municipalities, town councils, you know, the governing bodies of many of our communities sometimes forget about the human assets that we have in our communities and the link to those human assets. I know that the big push is industry. People want to have industry in their community. But I think if you don't have a strong community to back it up, you can have all the industry you want. But if you don't have that community to back it up in a place where people want to spend their money and want to live and want their children to go to school and be part of volunteering in that community, it makes it very difficult. And you know, some people think that if they bring an industry that's you know, that's going to be the end all and be all. But like I said, if you don't have a concrete community for those people to live in, they're still going to take their dollars and you know, access other services outside the community. So having that strong community base is really important. Myself, I just recently launched my own community co-op, Hand in Glove Community Co-op here in Brandon. We're very small. We currently have one project that they're involved in, and I actually launched the social enterprise under a co-op model. I almost call it a social co-op, I guess, to a certain degree. It is a sewing project, and the target demographic for me, because I have about 8 or 9 years of settlement sector experience, is I work with refugees, particularly youth. And we have a sewing project. So the youth had come to me wanting to do a project, but we didn't know exactly what, but we knew that a lot of them wanted to learn how to sew, and they wanted to make a little money doing that. So we formed the co-op. The youth are ranging in age from 10 to 25, but we also have some adults as well. And in a typical co-op model, we have a board of directors. We have a membership, so the kids all pay $5 to belong to the co-op. And what we did was we found space in our community that was given to us for free. The community donated 14 sewing machines and all the material I could ever use. I still haven't gone through all the material. And that was all fine and dandy until I realized that I had no idea how to sew. It's kind of putting the cart before the horse, but I did know and had connections with who I think are probably the best sewers in the world. I had a very good friend that was at a Hutterite colony just outside of Brandon. And I approached the Hutterite colony about whether or not there would be some of the women who would like to volunteer their time every Saturday to teach the kids how to sew. And there was no hesitation. And so up until COVID, we were getting about 10 to 15 youth out every Saturday, and 4 or 5 of the Hutterite women would come in from the colony, and it was the perfect marriage. You could not have asked for a more diverse, happy, productive group. And I guess at the bottom line to all of this is that that I really wanted to instill in those kids, that they were the ones that were in charge of their program. And I think it's really important when we talk about cooperators that we talk about that ownership. That for me was the attraction. I wanted, these kids came from refugee camps, many of them. Many of them were born in refugee camps. Their parents were second and third generation refugees. And many of them, lacked the confidence when they came to the country. But when you could turn around and take a 14-year-old girl from Eritrea and turn her into marketing whiz just because of her own abilities, not because of anything that I did or anybody else did, but because she believed in herself. There's a lot to be said for the power of cooperation and collaboration. And there's a lot to be said of looking in your own communities for those very things, those very human assets. We had a discussion in the office, and when Michelle and Heather and I met previously, I think one of the things that we talked about was in many communities, and especially rural communities. I grew up on a dairy farm. I know on our particular farm, we sold eggs. My mom did some sewing. Many times we forget about that. We've got these assets in our community that are forgotten. And I bet any farm out there, there's 2 or 3 other little industries or businesses that are going on, but they're not supported and they're not always recognized. But yet they're adding to the economic value of the community, and they're kind of overshadowed at times. So I know that sometimes councils and don't see the big picture, and they don't always see all of the human assets that they have, and utilizing those human assets to bring forward economic growth is so important. And the cooperative system is a great way to take the power of a challenge to a problem and bring people together and bring them onto a common ground where they can work together to solve that problem and find the solution. So I think it's very important. So I'll stop there and we'll go on and to the next section. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, so I have a couple of questions. Let's. Thank you, Kyle. Wow, maybe I will pay you. Do you take pastries from? That's a yes. Okay, pastries aside. Okay, so I just wanted to ask a question that I think we had talked about last week together, and I think would be great to hear from either or both of you. So we talked about economic development as sort of as a profession is sort of evolving away from, I think this is Michelle's terminology, but smokestack chasing and industry chasing, although that's going to always be important, towards something that's a little bit more a broad consideration of economic development. And again, so anytime that people, sort of a group of people come together in any kind of concerted way and sort of focus on what they could be doing, I don't know, just anytime people to come together, that's economic development. So you also talked about something called mood walks, which I don't know what those are. So what did you mean by that? And can either of you elaborate a little bit more on how you think about economic development in those terms?
Yeah, so maybe we'll talk about the smokestack chasing. So I wasn't intending to be, critical of other economic development initiatives that are underway across the country. For some parts of our country, I would say that is very important. If you're in a more urbanized area or you're in an area that has industrial parks that you've developed, you obviously want to get those filled up. And so there is a place for that. I would suggest in our rural communities where we're not in that mindset of, we don't have service lots. If we do get someone coming in, they're often having to do their own servicing to set up whatever facility they might have. So the idea was really to, and we said things like incubation can happen anywhere. And so when we see what's happening in our communities, and our goal is to keep our residents and attract our residents and have people who come to visit us really enjoy their time here, having a major facility will help with providing the tax base that could help create those. But there's a much more direct link to actually have a really great community. it's a quicker path to being welcoming, to having people thinking about small businesses, to getting the visitors to stay a little longer and get your residents to consider how they might use their opportunities. So I would say that's probably the distinction for most of our rural folks, and what we're trying to do is that we can chase those smokestacks. I think it's a lot of effort that doesn't often get us a lot of benefit. And by, helping the Red Seal barber out of, fresh out of college, find a spot to set up her barber shop, is much faster pathway to actually having a good solid business in our community that then helps all of those things, helps the visitors, helps the residents, and generates some taxes as well for the municipal needs. Over to you, Wendy.
Yeah, and I think what Michelle is, like I said, we kind of had this discussion with the three of us last week, and I kind of touched on it a little bit when I was speaking, but it's the recognition of those human assets in our community, and I think it's so forgotten sometimes. And there's so many people in our communities that are doing small businesses that are relying on word of mouth, maybe some online, but could really use a boost from community recognition, and we are sometimes overlooking them. I've had lots of discussions with EDOs in the area about incubators and different types of incubators. Many communities have buildings that are not being utilized that could be turned into what I call a market incubator, where there would be stalls set up where if somebody is selling Mary Kay or making children's clothing and don't have that access or ability to finance a storefront, they could come on a Wednesday and a Saturday and set up in this market co-op area where they would be able to market their goods, and not only market their goods and make a little bit of money, but show the community what's out there. People are always amazed. I didn't realize we had all these wonderful things in our community, because many times we just don't recognize them. Here in our building, we also have a business incubator that is housing a number of small businesses that, again, either don't want a storefront, can't afford a storefront, want easy access so that they can do their business. And that's very successful. We always have a waiting list here for that space. So I think it's taking what opportunities are given to us and really focusing on what does the community need, and asking that question with the community. I think sometimes people just assume that they know what the community needs. We need industry, or we need we need more residential. But sometimes just asking that question about basic needs, and recognizing that there are people who are slipping between the cracks, whether they're vulnerable. What are we doing to enhance those people's lives in our community as well?
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Wendy. One thing about, the industry pieces that engages our community as well. So one of the things that we're looking to do is actually ask specifically of our community, what type of industry are you interested in having? So we have a new school being built. The old school is potentially going to be available. There's some issues with it. We may or may not get it. And we had a Health Canada cannabis facility that was interested in that old school. But the question was, is this something the community is willing to accept? It's in a residential area. Is there going to be issues? So I think it is important, even if, we're looking for some of those larger industries, let's get something that the community is really interested in having, or that builds on what we already have. We have a ton of greenhouses. We have a ton of beekeepers. We have, so even hemp production is kind of new for us. And so what can we add to the community versus something brand new, pops out of the box and takes up some space, but doesn't actually bring the community closer together. It's not something that's helping be a connector. It's a standalone idea. And so we're much more interested in trying to figure out what are those things that add to our network within our community.
Excellent. So we've got a couple more minutes here before I want to break into another discussion group. So I wanted to ask one more question. So what if you were speaking to one-on-one to somebody in this group today, what's one small way, what's one action or one sort of direction that they could take today or tomorrow or whenever, in order to be more responsive in fostering these community initiatives. So where would you suggest starting? And Wendy, do you want to go first?
I think I've already said this, but I think, and this is a lesson in everybody's life, is you need to listen. We spend a lot of time trying to solve a problem, and many times it's not always the right solution. And I think there's just so much value in actually listening with an unbiased, mindset, and listening to what people are saying, what people are needing, what people are not happy about. It works both ways. It doesn't always have to be about things that people are really happy about in the community. What are they not happy about? How is that impacting, where they're living, and why do they drive, an hour to get their groceries when they could shop locally? So, we need to be asking some more of those. Maybe they're difficult questions, but sometimes asking the difficult questions reaps you the best benefits. You don't necessarily want to hear the answers, but it's a little bit of honest truth sometimes really helps bring things that maybe you've just chose to either ignore and not see, or people don't want to talk about it because it causes a controversy. But I think sometimes asking those difficult questions will help people feel like they're more involved in not being part of the problem anymore, but being part of the solution.
Yeah, and Wendy, I mean, bang on. That's absolutely a piece of it. The piece that we can do, I think, as leaders in their community is be the examples of possibility. So those conversations where we are listening is yes, and how can we do that? Or how can we do that? Not always, say, well, that's not going to work here, and here's why. But okay, how can we make that happen? Who do we need to talk to? What do we need for resources? What do we need for money? What do we need to make this happen? How are we going to ensure that it is successful? And sometimes, and I think to Wendy's point about those difficult conversations is, how are you going to withstand the slings and arrows of the coffee shop? If this is something that you really want to get going, how can we get those folks on board? How can we get the armchair quarterbacks at least being quiet if they're not actually participating, so that it does not bring people down when they're trying to do something great for their community, when they have a great idea that they want to execute on. So definitely the pieces of possibility. My personal experience we bought an old building in Smoky Lake. We gutted it, put in a whole new floor and everything, because we're running a courier depot. And in order to do that, we need to have concrete and pallet jacks and things like that. And the word on the street was, you guys got so ripped off, you had to renovate that whole building. And our response was, we fully intended to do all of those things to make it possible. But that noise that goes on, those distractions that go on, can bring down a community initiative very, very quickly, because people get exhausted very, very quickly. So trying to figure out how to either silence those folks or give them an opportunity to participate, or be able to listen and say, we've heard you, but we're continuing anyways, and we'd like you to, say nothing or be positive about it. That's your choice.
Heather, can I just add one thing just really quickly? Just when you said, the armchair quarterbacks, when I started this small nonprofit for the refugees, the one thing that we did not want as a co-op was pity. We didn't want them viewing, these poor refugee children, they're down there, slaving away, making items. Well, it wasn't like that at all. And there was a bit of overcoming that mindset with some people. And the only way we did that was we invited people to come in. We invited people to participate and come in. And we had open houses quite frequently where people could come and see what we were doing and see the interaction between the Hutterites and the refugees and the Canadian volunteers that we had. So it's, it wasn't about, they were underserved and underprivileged and vulnerable. It was about these kids wanted to make a difference in their community. They wanted to give back. And that's what we had to refocus some people onto.